Hello out there. This is a chillaxed vibe session live. Camera off, more podcasty sort of style. I want to discuss world building, and since I've been kind of like meditating on this concept, I knew I was going to do this camera off because when we're going into the frequencies of world building, it's being done through the liminal space. And what is the liminal space? The liminal space is the threshold. It is the gateway into what they refer to as the other world in Celtic traditions. And this is more of an elven frequency, a fae frequency, an elemental sort of energy. These sorts of energies will begin to come more online for you as you transcend binary code. It's like the more you can merge the opposites and the more you can go neutral, then the more perceptive you can become to things that don't fit inside binary code. If you're too caught up in the binary coded system of things, this or that, either or, good versus evil, etc., then you will miss out on the energies that don't exist in things that can be defined. These are the energies that exist in what the Celtic tradition refers to as the other world. And there's a lot of mysteries here. You know, this is an energy of more of an elven energy, but also a Templar sort of energy as well. And there's this frequency that you'll navigate before you kind of cross dimensional thresholds into the elemental realms or the realms of the Fae, especially if you're doing something called reverse polarizing. What is reverse polarizing? Reverse polarizing is basically becoming the opposite of what you were scripted to be within the simulation. If you're in a binary coded script, because not everybody's a part of the same algorithm in it. This is like a very large simulation, right? So there are different adventures that you can have. Think of it like the Earth school concept that they talk about. If Earth is a school, and there are certain algorithms that you enter where, yeah, Earth is a school. Okay, and there are certain realms of mastery that you can choose to have on this particular planet. But to do that, you'll need to learn this art of world building, which when we think about world building in terms of what we were educated with in history, we think about empire, we think about royalty. This is what, we immediately think of with world building. We can even take that emperor card, which is the fourth major arcana card in the tarot deck. And usually the emperor is a ruler, a leader, somebody with a crown, a leader of empire. But that is the cover for what true world building is. True world building starts with your imagination. It starts with your ability to create, name what you create, and, stake your claim on it. So what's been happening in this particular, simulated environment, like the folks who've created more of the binary code or who are invested more within the binary coded simulation, what they have done is they've done their own world building, and it started with creativity. It starts with ideas. This is why initiated energies will always use theater. They will always use performance, because within that is an initiated secret of everything begins with that creative spark. That's why it can feel like it's rationed out if you're in what they call a quote unquote fallen timeline. that's something that can definitely happen. And if you're feeling like you don't have the space to be creative, if you feel like you don't have the time to be creative, that is a reflection of the algorithm that you're currently in, because it is such a precious resource. Creativity, creation, this is the most precious resource that we have. And so if you feel as though you are unable to be creative, it's speaking to something larger. Okay, it's speaking to something larger. Now, this message, I want to actually share it specifically with folks who may have at one point, or still do, consider themselves to be a star seed, especially folks who identify with the indigo sort of frequency. Okay. So if you've seen yourself as an indigo star seed or a star seed in general, or if that particular energy has come up for you, then this would be a good message for you, I think. Because what happens for folks, and this definitely happened to me, and I've connected with folks that this has also happened to, is like folks who are interested in this concept of world building, of mastery, will get pulled into spirituality first as a way to fulfill their goals, fulfill their desires. Okay. And they'll get jerked around sometimes by different spiritual organizations. They'll have weird experiences with spiritual organizations, but the idea is that they're seeking for some sort of cosmic knowledge, some sort of cosmic insight. They're looking for mastery. And so what does the simulation tell us? Okay, go to spirituality. If you're looking for mastery, go there. But that is only a part of the cosmic nature of things. You would find and initiate yourself into, I'm not going to compare, but I'll say at least just as deep of like revelations if you were in the spiritual community that you would if you were, say, in the arts. Okay, the creative process, the artistic process, the process of bringing something to life is a spiritual process. It's a holy process. It's a sacred process. This is the closest that you get to the fabric of creation. The fabric of the cosmos, I should say, is through this act of creation. But what happens with a lot of folks who are connected to the cosmos, connected to this fabric of creation, and are looking for pathways to remember that and to incorporate more of that into their lives, what they'll do is they'll go into spiritual sort of organizations, right? Or they'll go into different religions or different, I don't know, priesthoods or covens, whatever. All right. But that is going to cap you in terms of your ability to expand your consciousness, oddly enough, because there's always going to be a ceiling with a certain spiritual organization, the way that it's set up within the simulation. There's an aspect of your consciousness that you kind of end up leasing out when you join that particular spiritual organization. It's just like the way the hierarchy of consciousness is set up. So you get to a certain point where you're a spiritual seeker and you're learning all of these texts, you're reading these verses, you're studying this artistry, these diagrams that these spiritual sort of groups put out. But you're capping your consciousness and your ability to actually create. The real, connection, that true connection to the cosmic fabric of things is you creating your own way of knowing. But spirituality, unless you start your own sort of spiritual group, you won't be able to reach that level of creation. All right. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you are a Christian, right? Or maybe you're not a Christian. Maybe you're you're just really interested in the story of Jesus, or you're fascinated by different stories of the Bible, you know. So you study the Bible, all right, and and then maybe you're also an artist and you paint pictures related to what you study in the Bible. That's you having a conversation with that religious sort of piece, right? That spiritual sort of piece. You're now making your own meaning through that cosmic ocean of creation. Whereas if you're somebody who loves Jesus, loves Jesus just as much as that person who is really interested in Jesus and likes reading the Bible and then paints. But if you're somebody who loves Jesus and you put your meaning in interpreting the word of Jesus only through, um, let's say, attendance, you go to church every day, you read your Bible every night. That's great. That's a part of it, dedication, stick to itiveness, mastery. But did you create with that knowing? Because that's how you like really show your connection is through your creation. You're having a cosmic conversation. But it's hard to do that with the way that religion has been set up a lot of times. People do it. People do it often. But it's kind of not encouraged sometimes in certain religions to do that because it's everything's already been created. The curriculum's already been created. The meaning has already been created. So when you get into religion or spirituality, and I'm not just going to even pinpoint religion because a lot of times it shows up in these spiritual groups that seem like they're really like um creative or open-minded, but then they get like really culty. Okay. It's because like of the structure of spirituality, of spiritual groups on this planet. A lot of times, like the way that group dynamics are structured because of the polarity, what they call the polarity cross. There are the haves and the have nots. It coding wise, this goes beyond money and stuff like that as well. I've worked with folks where this happens often actually, where they are like in the quote unquote upper polarity where, maybe they come from families which are like well to do, but they are the scapegoat. So it's not just about money, it's not just about resources, it's different. It's like this, somebody has to make an agreement, in the family to be that quote black sheep, to have the burden put onto them because of the law of polarity in the universe. It's like it's a way that the cosmos has organized itself. I'm not saying all of the cosmos, but a good chunk of it looks like it's looking like the Milky Way and Andromeda. Maybe there's more, but those are the ones I've been tapping into, is like the Milky Way galaxy and the Andromeda galaxy. And what a lot of the ascension materials are going to say is that the Andromeda galaxy is a place where you can go and ascend, get your light body and stuff. And there are other places too, Sirius is another one for sure. But there's going to be a checkerboard. There's going to be like an admissions process related to this. Okay, it's an it's like, it's the best way I can describe it is like, imagine that you bought a house and your house is in an HOA. It's an HOA house, homeowners association house. There are certain rules and processes and protocols and procedures. And they kind of tell us about this in the way they set up the secret orders. Usually you need to apply, you need to be recommended. I was reading something where they were giving all of the steps to being in a particular, I don't know if it was a Masonic order, but basically these steps were saying like, you need to have this karma cleared, you need to have all this stuff done before you can actually initiate into some of these spiritual practices. You start getting to certain levels of information where the information though is gate kept in spirituality. Okay. So you walk a fine line. You know, you might be somebody who's looking to expand your consciousness. Maybe you've connected with the indigo frequency. That is a particular vibrational octave that extends the control matrix, or I should say not extends, but it transcends the control matrix, that indigo frequency, that blue frequency. And then there's a blue violet frequency related to that as well. And so that might be why you've been connecting with these like indigo sort of energies as well, because you know, when you think of indigo, if you mix blue and violet together, it's indigo. It's a certain vibrational octave that you're able to experience consciousness at, which is a little bit like more expanded. So on the one hand, you're going to look at these spiritual texts, these ascension texts, to try to like emulate that sort of indigo sort of consciousness. But a big part of that consciousness is creation. It's the ability to create your own thing, not to, you know, just read somebody else's creations or listen to somebody else's creations and leave it there. It's great to be influenced by others. It's great to appreciate other people's creations. And we're going to need to get more into this habit of responding to other creations through our own creations. A lot of times, you know, this is what social media is training us to do with the comments and stuff like that, is like there are people out there who will comment all day on people's platforms, but would never actually make their own content. You know, like there's, but that is showing a consciousness capping when that happens. Okay. And we're going to need to extend beyond that. And it can be scary sometimes to be creative. I get it. I used to be somebody who I didn't think I was creative. I thought creativity was for other people. I thought that was out of my lane. I was in that like stay in my lane sort of energy. But so I'm not saying like I haven't been there. I definitely have. I've had to fight for my creations, literally sometimes, you know, because art is actually a form of warfare, y'all. That's what's funny. That's what I'm learning as I get more into these energies of what art truly is. You know, if we're looking at this from a cosmic perspective, I'm not going to get into it too much here. But the more I learn about this, the more ironic that particular slogan that you see a lot of times is, which is make art, not war. I don't know if y'all have seen that slogan, make art, not war, because the more you learn about the secrets of art and the aesthetics of authority, the more you realize that art is a form of warfare. So the make art, not war sort of bumper stickers that they have is kind of, I think whoever like, because I mean, they're everywhere. That's a pretty common slogan. I think that whoever approved that is getting a little chuckle out of that, because art is it's a subtle form of warfare. It's a very sophisticated form of warfare. So if you have encountered spiritual warfare, if you're encountering that now, your best defense, your best energetic hygiene is going to be your creativity, your artistry. My first book that I wrote that got published randomly, it was like a very random way it all went down. But I wrote that at a time when I was going through extreme spiritual warfare, cult-based spiritual warfare. And that book was my clapback. Okay. I channeled all of that, all of the rage. I channeled all of the feelings of being cast aside or, you know, just different things. And I channeled it into that creative work. I could have journaled about it and left it there. But no, something within me was like, I need to create, because it's like when you create something in response outside of like trying to defend yourself or anything or argue, because a lot of times in our society, we're trained to argue or Um, put it in the comment section. But now you're feeding that same egregore, that you're pushing up against. You're just feeding it. Whereas you can create your own egregore. You can create your own creation, which actually takes out, or it like takes you out of their particular ecosystem, and you start growing your own ecosystem. That's the best form of spiritual warfare. If you feel like you're going through spiritual warfare, the first thing that you should do, well, outside of take a break, like first just get rest, because sleep deprivation is like the first way that spiritual warfare happens. All right, sleep deprivation. So if you're in that, like I've been there too. Look, I've been through it all. Okay. I had like a very stacked sixth house when I was before I started the process of reverse polarizing. Okay. So I've had to navigate a lot of stuff in my like work and my daily routines in my life. Like everything was a challenge or a Rubik's Cube, you know? So I've been through a lot of weird stuff, like just really looking at the archives of my life. It almost doesn't add up. You know, I'm 39 years old, but like the stories I have now, like this, it's like the stories of like a 79-year-old, you know? It's because like I don't know, I live with a lot of intensity. I go full in on things, you know, and I'm on a path of mastery. And mastery for me is not getting on a summit. It's not climbing a hill and staking my claim on top of it. You know, mastery for me is also realizing that I'm always a student as well. I'm always learning, I'm always growing. But anyways, all that to say, I've been through a lot of weird situations, okay? And making sure that you have the space to create, it gets you out of that timeline. It gets you out of like a weird timeline of someone else's creation. This is where you get into the energies of like narcissism and triangulation and all that kind of stuff. The more you can stay in that consciousness web of whatever the problem is, then the more you're getting harvested. Okay. But, you know, if you start diverting your attention away from that web that's being weaved and you start creating your own web, okay, because all this stuff is like, you know, it's all weaving. It's a cosmic principle. This is why the spider is a very old and cosmic being, because it weaves. Weaving is a primordial cosmic principle. So if you're caught up in a narcissistic web, the best thing you can do is detach from that web and start building your own web. Okay, so if you're in the narcissistic web, you might even be experiencing weird sleep deprivation or dream attacks, or, you know, the whole nine, all that kind of stuff. So first thing is just detach from the web. And you do that by reclaiming your rest. You reclaim your sleep. You reclaim your right to dream. Okay. Your energetic hygiene. So if you're constantly busy, if you constantly have a whole bunch of stuff to do on your to-do list, then that shows that your energetic hygiene is probably not where it needs to be, or, you know, you might be sleep deprived. So I would always first, before you can be creative, you need to be well rested. Okay, so the first way they're going to get at you through the warfare is going to be your rest, your sleep, your dreams. That's going to be the first way. That's the easiest. So first you got to make sure your body's in the game. Okay, make sure that you're getting your sleep, you're eating well, you know, all that stuff. The exercise, like making sure your daily routines is based upon thriving. As much as you can, do that. And then once you've gotten a hang of that, because even that you have to teach, sometimes you have to teach yourself how to take care of yourself. If you've been in a sacrifice script and you've been indoctrinated into that since a young age, that means that since a young age, what have you been doing? You've been deferring your dreams on for others. It started early. So of course, you know, now you're trying to get out of that, you would need to train yourself. You would need to teach yourself another way. But so once you do that, and you get your wellness in order and all of that, then it's creativity. And yes, you force yourself to do it at first. Yes. You're going to have a strong resistance sometimes that says, don't do it. You're wasting your time. Don't be creative. Don't create today. Don't. Yes, you're going to have those programs and you're just going to need to override them. Just like when you go to the gym, or I don't really do gyms, but if you're going to go take a walk or go on a hike, whatever, get your exercise. Sometimes you need to talk yourself to the mat. And, we let art go by and creativity go by, but that's a part of the fallen timeline. Because the beings who are on the more abundant timelines, they got lots of art. They got lots of time for art. They got lots of space for art. They are creating all the time. You can see it. You can see it. And now some people might be like, okay, yeah, but I know a struggling artist. I know somebody who, they tried to make it and then they didn't make it. We all know that, right? And that's usually what's put in our face as why we shouldn't create. Because there's so many people who they had an artistic dream, they had a creative dream, and it didn't work out. And they failed. Okay. And then, stability and all of that kind of stuff was compromised. But the way it goes in the simulation is it's already set up who's going to be successful in those endeavors and who is not. You would need to be of a certain I'm not going to even say bloodline. I feel like that's too limiting. I've been saying bloodline, but I would say let's just say you'll need to be at a certain coding to make it. You would need to have taken certain, and by the way, this is all for entertainment purposes only. You would have needed to take or understand certain oaths related to the arts and performance and what it truly means. That would have already had to have been downloaded to you in your algorithm. And if you didn't have it, then no, you're not making it. Art is war. Art is war. So that being said, it's a non-negotiable. Yes, you grew up in school systems that told you to put aside the art, that said that it wasn't important. That was it's all opposite. It's opposite. They'll teach you the opposite thing. A part of it is because it's trickery, but another part of it is it's because it's keeping in alignment with neutrality. Sometimes, like for the beings who constructed this whole simulation, they know about neutrality and they know the power that it has. So they need to find ways to be neutral. One way they've done that is they've said one thing and done another. That keeps them neutral. It's not about being the best or the kindest, but it's also not about being the most evil. It's like a middle sort of thing. So what does this mean? This means that you can find a lot of the codes within the simulation through the arts. But if you don't have the eyes to see, it's like you're walking around illiterate. That was the biggest thing for me, was realizing, and we've all kind of had those moments, those like weird Truman Show moments where you look around and you're like, dang, am I the only one who's been asleep to what's been going on? Like you might have those moments. But it's a part of this whole thing of, the way that these secrets and these initiated frequencies, the way they've been being passed on has not been through words. It's been through images, symbolism, and color spectrum. And you're either in or you're out with that. And if you've been coded for binary code, it's just like you saw in the school systems. Especially if you grew up in the US school systems. You already know how that goes. It's about your zip code, right? Your algorithm. They're telling you. Now we need to think a little deeper. We need to get deeper into the program to really see the system behind this. So, there's certain schools, right, where if you're in a certain zip code, you're going to have like a lot more options. If you're in a really wealthy zip code, you're going to have more options around classes, that you're able to take, quality of teachers, all down the line. And then if you're in a lower, lower socioeconomic status zip code, you're going to get the bare bones minimum. It's the same thing, y'all. This is the real color line. It doesn't have to do with actual skin color. It's a coding issue. This is why when the tech boom was happening, there was a weird like clapback that happened where they were talking about how like the tech industry didn't prioritize diversity enough, how like certain apps were being created, certain user interfaces were being created in a way that didn't prioritize all cultures. That's kind of like those sorts of conversations that folks were having about technology. It really actually didn't have to do with race. It had to do with the sort of user experiences that were being crafted for people like in the system. We're not all on the same track, life track or program. So, and the simulation is vast, I'm staying curious, my particular goal remains the same, which is to transcend any samsara program. For me to do that, I need to explore other algorithms of the simulation. But sometimes there's going to be like an HOA situation, okay, or an application. Shoot, some algorithms might be like a Harvard type thing, you know what I mean? So the information is there. You just got to discern and you need to be able to peep beyond what is being spoken. You do that, you open that portal through your creativity and you show up for yourself and you show up for your creativity because that is your largest connection to the cosmos is your creativity. And you show up for your creativity even on the days when you don't want to, or you think you could be doing something else that is a part of your programming. It was literally the exact opposite. This is why in certain secret orders, most of them, there's something related to theater with them. There's something related to performance. That is where the real priesthood is, actually. Yeah, there's the priesthood of, if you go to certain churches or spiritual organizations and whatnot. But there's also priesthoods, deeper priesthoods, more initiated priesthoods in the nightclubs, at raves. Now, those are the priests, those DJs. Come on now. Hella initiated. Why do you think, y'all, that the Vatican and all that, didn't they start throwing raves? Go look it up. I'll kid you not. I was like, wow, okay. But it makes sense. You gather a whole bunch of people together. You play some music. They play the exact same like rave music I used to dance to back in the day when I was a raver, which literally feels like a whole ass other life ago, but it was an actual thing I did. But, it makes sense. It's like, okay, you're gathering thousands of people. It's all an energy harvesting thing. Like you play music, you get them to alter their consciousness through music. You got the lights going. From an interdimensional sort of perspective of beings who might be like harvesting energy, that's a great setup. This is why things changed for us so much when we had the pandemic, because we were, you notice that not everybody struggled during the pandemic. There's a narrative that they tell us about on the news, and then there's your personal narrative. Not everyone struggled the same way, or not everybody had the same experiences in 2020. For some people, they felt like they were living for the first time. Some people that felt like their world was ending. What algorithm were you on? That's going to make all the difference for how you perceived that particular time. So, creativity. making this a part of your spiritual practice. Okay, you're somebody who's deeply involved or interested in the cosmos, in cosmic knowledge, in the cosmic fabric of life, in your multidimensional nature. You're going to naturally ask spiritual questions. But are you creating through those questions? That's the message. This is like more of a message related to the elves. Yeah, the energies of the elves are coming through. So I'm going to share what I learned through them. And I was hard-headed, y'all. I was not listening. I was gaslighting myself so much. I actually do that. I do that often. I'll gaslight myself for a while sometimes. It's partially like it's also to just balance things out. It's so that I can remain neutral. So I'm always kind of like questioning myself sometimes. It's not always helpful, but for the sort of deep dives that I go on pretty regularly, it's just good to get me grounded. You get me like a little bit more yeah, I'll need to like sometimes like question myself or gaslight myself like, "Oh, just because, this coincidence happened doesn't mean anything." And so that way like I get more coincidences, and so I'm sure, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, why did I talk about that? Oh yeah, because that's the rational mind program. The gaslighting is the rational mind program. That's how it thrives. And so we got that like a lot, right? We got that in school, we got that at home, we got that with our friends, we got that at work, et cetera, et cetera. The rational mind program. And it's going to be really difficult for you to connect with this elven consciousness of world building if you're too caught up in the rational mind program. So I am sharing this story because I'm somebody who's been skeptical. I'm a polarity integrator, so I've been on opposite sides of the polarity. I've been super into spirituality. I went completely, I won't say atheist, but I went completely agnostic and didn't care about anything spiritual. Like I've gone through different phases with this, okay? And I cut off a lot of my connection to creativity, and I had to revive that and bring that back online. And that took a long time. That was a long process. So, a lot of your creativity and what you think you can do, a lot of that is based upon your gatekeeping yourself. Like, we're going to be our biggest gatekeepers. It's something we were groomed to do, is to gatekeep ourselves and to gatekeep each other. That's how this polarity program has been set up. So your best route for deprogramming or transcending some of this, like these spiritual warfare scripts, is actually not through spirituality, where it's like, okay, like we've all probably been through a time, right, where maybe you were like going through spiritual warfare and you're like, oh, I'm going to get a candle and I'm going to dress this candle and this is going to be to combat this sort of thing. A lot of people on the spiritual path have gone through that, or doing a spell and all of that. The reason why the spells work is because of the art. Like, the more intention you put in it, which means the more you make it your own, then the more it works, because you're going deep into creator mode. People who do a lot of spells or who create spells, so there's a difference. There are folks who do spells, they look up spells, but then they do it exactly how, the person told them. And then there's the others who create spells. It's a different consciousness rank in the simulation. As we expand consciousness, we're going to get out of like saying rank as much. And at the same time, there is still a ranking thing that happens, okay? Because you want to connect with the oversoul. You want to connect with that oversoul. So that's transcending the soul. But that's a form of consciousness technology that opens up to you, okay? And there is a rank with that. It's like it's been the way the initiated sort of frequencies have set these energies up, is you do kind of need to to navigate different portals and have access and be able to basically meet whatever consciousness or whatever you encounter. You need to meet that frequency and hold that frequency. But for some people, they've already been encoded with that. So, a lot of people are talking about dragons and stuff like that. Some people, their draconic self has been on since day one. That's in their family script. For others, it has not been. So it's been okay. Well, usually it's the people who are on a certain side of the polarity who are going to have that draconic energy. And this is also where we get into ley line magic and all that kind of stuff as well. You got to know the ley lines. You got to know that particular frequency. That's a draconic sort of energy. So, the way that we play, I don't want to say play catch up, but the way that we create the life that we want, create our circumstances, is through creation. So if you're on your spiritual path, your creativity is what propels your spirituality. This is what they refer to. I don't even know if I fully like this description, but they call it chaos magic. But really, I think that that's too polarized because you have order versus chaos within the simulation. So if you focus on the word chaos, then it's like oppositional to order. But it's this idea basically of going in the moment, utilizing dark matter energy, utilizing raw creative potential to build your world, to influence your world. That being said, when you're navigating certain grid systems, it is based on rank and hierarchy. So you kind of need to know what another person is working with when you do rituals and spells, because you might be doing a protection ritual, or you might be trying to, mess someone up who has a certain bloodline that outranks you. Good luck with that. Good luck with that one. It's better if you build your own world, build your own web, get out of their web, build your own, but you have to have your creativity on deck. This is a cosmic weaver energy. So, and then I just wanted to share, I have comments off. I'm in a very, let's just say I'm in the energy of the Christos right now. I'm in a Christic energy. And some people might hear that and say, oh, well, that means, she's in that love thy neighbor, forgive them for they know not what they do. That's an aspect of it, for sure. Me keeping my comments off ensures the most peace and the less harm. Because another part, you have Christ, you have the Christic energy, and you have the Christos. Different frequencies. When you're getting into the Christos sort of algorithms, you know how I've been mentioning HOAs, homeowner associations. You notice how one person buys a house and it's not attached to an HOA. They can buy their house, right? And what can they do if they want? Paint it pink. They can, they can bend the rules. Nobody's going to care. Whereas if you got your HOA situation, somebody's walking around with a clipboard, looking at your stuff, looking at you, okay, making sure the details are right. All right. So that's what happens in the matter realms, right? We all know about different environments where things need to be in tip-top shape, or there's a zero tolerance policy, right? That happens in algorithms too. Okay. So a part of what I mean when I say I'm in my Christic frequency and I'm in my Christos frequency, a part of that means love thy neighbor, forgive them for they know not what they do. The peace that passeth all human understanding. I mean that too. That's definitely a part of it. But there's another side, the Christos, which is zero tolerance. Okay. Immediately that's not even having the space to hold anything that's outside of blamelessness. Okay, so it's like a zero tolerance kind of frequency too. So that's another reason, because I'm like, okay, so because depending upon what the energies are, and then I'm in that web, I have to, that web has been cast. through, a comment or something like that, if I'm focusing on neutrality, that has to immediately go back, but I do need to dance in their web for a bit to make that happen. Okay, whereas like I can just build my own web right here. And so it's because I'm in my Christos frequency. I'm not always going to be. It depends on what I'm navigating. But because I'm in my Christos frequency, um, it is the most peaceful and the less harmful for me to have my comments off. Okay. That's the world, that's the realm of a polarity integrator. Okay, this is my happy medium. So I'm able to share this message that I've been sitting on for a bit. I've been wanting to connect with y'all about the elves and the elven frequency. I've talked about it a little bit here and there, but I've been meaning to do like a deep dive related to it. And it has to do with world building, building your world. So I hope that y'all are chilling. Let's see. I have like 3 drinks. I have a water, I have a sparkling water, and I have a coffee. I'm gonna do sparkling water. I don't know how I collected all these beverages. Okay. But yeah, I hope you're comfortable. I hope you're chilling. I also did like the hot tub a little earlier, so I'm just like, just want to chill out in my socks, just hang out. So the message from the elven frequency, I'm going to read some of my book, The Technomancy of Hyperdimensional Warfare, but I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start with a story around how I like really started connecting with the elven frequency. It's always been around, but this has been a very there's just been a lot of like warfare related to this energy because it's very powerful. If you've been in like a restricted sort of algorithm, and this goes back to indigos, because I don't subscribe to this particular ideology, but I did at one point subscribe to it, and I talked about it, so I just want to address it. They have this like ranking system related to indigos where you can be like an indigo 1, indigo 2, and indigo 3. I even like made content about it more on TikTok, which I don't really do TikTok anymore, but um I don't subscribe to that. I think, that's just a way of describing the sacrifice program. So for folks who don't know, um, there are a couple ascension texts that talk about this. And this comes from the energy known as the Guardian Council, or yeah, the Guardians. The Guardian Council, and they've been revising how they've been sharing this information too, so I will say that. And at the same time, the way that the whole Indigo 1, 2, and 3 was set up was to basically describe sacrifice, the need for the polarity based sacrifice program on this planet, or at least for a group to bear the brunt. Okay. So the way they described it, though, is that Indigo 1 is the most advanced indigo. This is the grid worker. This is the one who works directly with the land and has the consciousness to connect with the land, heal the land, connect with ancient records of the land, all that kind of stuff. And you kind of need to have a lot of your consciousness activated for that. The higher chakras need to be activated for that. So that's Indigo 1. Indigo 2s were supposed to be like beings who were starting their own like healing centers, yoga studios, more practitioner based sort of energies. And Indigo 3s were supposed to be the most talented. Where have we heard this at? Get this, y'all. Indigo 3s are supposed to be the most talented and able to do all three, able to be a grid worker and all that, and then also like start their own like healing center and all that. But here's the thing, they're so good. They're like supposed to be the quote frontline workers, because a lot of this stuff gets really militaristic. You get into the angelic realms, it's very like militaristic. It's very rank and file. You always got to think about rank and stuff. Um, but the thing is like they're so good that they have more trauma to carry than average. So it's like the indigo 3 grows up in like extreme trauma, okay, has a really, really difficult life. And then they have all of these like entity attachments that are put on them. They have like these Nephilim souls or Nephilim spirits that they're carrying. But really, y'all, this is just a code around how like indigo 3s aren't supposed to become indigo 1s if we follow that rank and file system, because somebody has to take the fall. Okay, so they make it really difficult for a person labeled as indigo 3 to ascend. So an indigo 3 person will constantly be caught up in a spiritual warfare script, okay, and fighting consciousness retrieval. Okay, so but it's a part of the design for them to do that. Okay, so if you subscribe too much to that, then you get caught up in you start drinking the Kool-Aid of, oh, if I just am good enough, if I'm pure enough, one day I'll ascend and I'll be an indigo 1 and all this sort of stuff. And then they put in the whole twin flame narrative in that too. They put that in there. It's like the more advanced light workers or the more advanced star seeds, they get to link up with their twin flame. That's another thing. But if you were in a more fallen timeline algorithm, then you would always be in a runner chaser dynamic in general. It would just be programmed for you. This is why like things are like really negatively fated for like certain twin flame dynamics. But then, there are other beings like maybe like beings who are of like a guru type status. Maybe they do find the love of their life, but it's actually, it was written in they're in an algorithm that supports that. Okay, this is when you start navigating Earth as a school, you do start seeing this more. There are certain algorithms you can tap into. But then you have to navigate this polarity program, this binary code. If you were set up to be a binary code person or an indigo 3, a lot of indigo 3ers are in the binary code. If you were set up to be a binary code person, to get to that indigo frequency, you would need to cross that binary code threshold to do that. So if you'd have to change your color on the checkerboard in order to do that. And then you would need to balance out the black and the white within, the dark and the light within simultaneously. So that's what they're not telling people. Is, there a lot of the ascension texts want you to focus on being of the light, being good, all that sort of stuff. But if you are crossing a dimensional threshold, and with that being said, a lot of these ascension texts, they'll tell you that they have density locks. Like, why does the light body have density locks? And the whole thing is like, they're basically their way of rationalizing it is like, well, if you're too powerful without balancing your consciousness, then you can cause a lot of harm. Okay, well then how did the beings who are really powerful, who have a lower consciousness, how did they get that power? Like, we need to start asking those questions. Why is it now all of a sudden that power is being gatekept when it's talking about starseed stuff? So these are the little programs that we kind of need to peep. And a lot of these programs are stories. You can find this a lot in like religious texts as well. These stories have been told to prop up and normalize the polarity programs on this planet. But if we look a little deeper and if we start looking at the hidden curriculum, you can't actually be too polarized. You need to be more neutral, okay? In order to hold a larger consciousness bandwidth, you would need to be out of a binary coded system. I actually wanted to discuss or address something that has been coming up recently in conversation. And maybe some other folks who tap into this may have thought about this or heard about this. But a few years ago, there was this information that was coming out about the Christic spiral. And there's this difference between the Christic spiral, which is what they call a tri-wave frequency, and then they have a bi-wave spiral, which is their binary coded frequency. And one of them was supposed to be a more organic sort of flower of life sort of energy. It was supposed to be like more of a higher vibrational timeline. And then they were talking about this bi-wave frequency, which is the fallen timeline. And they called that as being the more Metatronic sort of energy as well. And they're, basically saying like, people have the opportunity to get their act together and get on the tri-wave frequency instead of the bi-wave. And you have all these like ascension teachers and like spiritual teachers who were talking about this tri-wave versus bi-wave. And what they're doing is they're telling people, oh, like it's up to you to get to tri-wave, which is true. Okay, yes, you need to decide that you want something enough to go after it. But what they're not saying is that it was set up that way. It's not like why are there two timelines, for example? Well, because if we're in that polarity sort of consciousness, some people would need to be on the more expanded consciousness timeline, and to bring things to neutral, because things are more based on neutrality than polarity, to bring things to neutral, they would need to hold their high timeline, they would need to balance that out with a fallen timeline to bring it to neutral. These are the mysteries of cosmic law that humanity doesn't get. So they're telling people, oh, yeah, you got to get out of this fallen timeline. But some people are already designed to be on that fallen timeline. And yeah, you could take accountability into your hands. You could turn on God mode. And you could be like, I don't care what the algorithm says. It's at this intention and I'm going to make this happen. And the way that you would need to discern that information, the way you would need to search for that information, like that, it's a very big commitment. It's a very, very big commitment, y'all. It's not work for me, because it's like, it's just, I'm in my, I like to say I'm in my yes. This year has been a yes year for me. If it's not yes, I don't do it. If I don't feel the yes, I don't do it. Like it's a very serious like yes year for me. So, but I've needed to do that in order to make sure that I stay in a certain frequential bandwidth. Okay, because as soon as I'm trying to make a decision and then all of a sudden my body's tensing up, my stomach's clenching, well, then I know my body already told me that's not in your yes. You would have to shrink your consciousness, shrink your frequency bandwidth to hold on to this, and then you wouldn't be in your yes. But there's some people who have been slated for more of that bi-wave frequency, the fallen timeline. I was, for sure. Like, that doesn't mean that I'm going to like accept that. But I also realize it's like, no, I definitely had that Indigo 3 script going on. And if I just listened to spirituality, what the spiritual gurus were saying, then I would be screwed. But what helped me the most was creativity, was creation, making meaning through creation, making my own path through creation. So that's what we're going to talk about. And this is the Elven frequency. But I had to let go of a lot of inner child wounding, because there's a lot of stuff that we were normalized to do in childhood, to give up our creative urges, to grow up, even the way that recess and playtime was like rationed off, and, worksheets got introduced in the classrooms a lot of times. Like all of these things contributed to the sacrifice of our creativity. It was like used as an offering, our creative energy. And meanwhile, as that creative energy was being used as an offering, other algorithms, people or beings in other algorithms were utilizing that creative rerouting for their to do their own thing, to make their own creations, to bolster themselves up, because this was the system design. Okay, so if you are interested in transcending that, okay, you would need to do so through your creativity. That would be your greatest spiritual act. And I had this realization a little over a year ago that, and this was like around the time when um I stopped like doing coaching, because I started off as like more of a wellness coach, and then I went into spiritual coaching. And I was realizing that I was staying in a loop in spirituality. And I would always be in this energy of spiritual warfare because of the way the algorithm was set up. But if I started looking at things, two things helped: creativity and like actually just creating, moving through the creative process, and then also technomancy as well, looking at things more as an operating system, which helped me get to neutral more, and not get so caught up in the script of what was going on. Because if you react too much to the script, then you're like caught in the web through your emotion. But if you can remain neutral and act from there and build from there, you're a lot better off. Like, you're more autonomous in that particular regard. But I needed to revive my creativity. So it took a few years, but maybe 2 years ago, year and a half, 2 years ago, is when I really started touching base with the elemental realm. And it was hard at first. You'll know if you're looking across dimensional thresholds, because usually the elemental realms, you're like, only people who are in a healthy algorithm will have a healthy connection with the elemental realms. So there's this thing that ascension texts talk about a lot, which they call corrupted elementals. But it just depends on what side of the polarity that you're on. But there's another side of the polarity where it's like, yeah, fairies, elves, all kinds of stuff, and people will be like, yeah, I have fairies in my garden and this and this and that. It's because they're in a different algorithm. They're in a different frequency bandwidth. The way that spirituality talks about it is like their consciousness is higher, but you know, they're in an algorithm that allows their consciousness to be higher. That's what I've been discovering. So it's not to say that, and that's not to say like you do need to work to turn on your consciousness. You need to also be able to have a love of creativity, a love of creation, to honor your creativity and creations in a society that is verbally telling you why they're not as valuable. Um, but yeah, there was a lot of creative blocks I needed to move through. And I did that with the elven realms. At first, I was having weird uh, toothaches. That'll happen. Tooth pain will happen before you connect with them, because if you think about it, you're getting into the root of things, and your teeth are connected to roots as well. Also, you might get like a root chakra pain as well. Okay, that's another sign. um so you might be moving through that, and then but that just means you'll need to cross a certain dimensional threshold. I actually have a teeth etheric implant removal meditation that would be helpful, to just move through. There's a lot of machinery that's like right between your ears and your jawline to keep you in a very specific timeline or in a very specific grid system. So for you to even communicate with the elemental realms, you need to transcend that grid system. So I started to communicate with them and cultivate a relationship actually when I stopped focusing on ascension. And I was like, I'm going to explore the underworld, the inner earth. I'm going to go that way instead of like trying to go into these ascension things, because I was like, this is feeling like I'm feeling really gaslit in the ascension realms. But I had to go through a communication barrier. Literally, my body was not reacting well. Mainly, it was like my face. Like you go through a lot of. It's like the Alice in Wonderland through the Looking Glass. There's a reason why they talk about through the looking glass specifically, because it's like you have to let go of the normal way you've seen reality. And it can be jarring. You know, if you read Alice in Wonderland, she, and if you were to like talk to her, you know, if you were a teacher, you know, and you were to hear some of the things she said, you might be like, oh, this girl's disturbed. I need to send her to the counselor. We need to follow up. We need to give her a case manager. Okay, so there is that energy that you move through. And a lot of programming was done to us in the teenage years, in your teen years, to divide you. And this is why you actually will connect with your inner genius and your inner demon or daemon. You'll connect with these frequencies as you connect also with your inner teen. Okay. And this is what's gonna like lead you into the more of the elemental realms. And yes, there are a lot of corrupted elementals. There's a lot of dark stuff that I had to move through. A lot of like weird technology. I'm not gonna talk about it here, but yeah, I saw it all. There were programs that I needed to go through that basically wanted to make me think that it was the worst thing in the world for me to even try to evolve, you know, like that I went through a portal where it's like literally everything, like every negative thing I could think of, I went through it in that portal. Like it was weird. A lot of weird stuff, but they're all just programs which are like, stay in your lane. They're stay in your lane programs. Okay, but if you are connected with the cosmic ocean of things, your lane is the cosmic ocean, you know? It's like if you were caught up in a sundown town. I don't know if they still have sundown towns, but that was back in the day, in the days of segregation. You're in a sundown town. That means you can't be a certain skin color or a certain color code, let's say, and be out at night. Okay, that's the energy of stay in your lane programs. Okay, and they can get like that. They really, really can. It's a warfare type of situation a lot of times. Just think about like video game warfare. We know it unconsciously or subconsciously. That's why people are like so obsessed with those warfare video games. So yeah, for you to transcend those stay in your lane programs, you would need to transcend those dimensional bandwidths, and you would also need to set the intention to turn on certain capacities within yourself. And it starts through believing that you can. Yes, I know how corny that sounds. Yes, we're bringing it into Disney. Okay, I'm going to bring in Disney Once Upon a Time with this. Because that's how this is going to sound so, it sounds so weird, but like, I think this is a part of why my rational mind program still turns on. Okay. I haven't fully let it go yet because I don't know. I think it's useful. I think it's useful to have a rational mind program, but, I still need to let it go and morph it. I still have to evolve it so that it suits my needs. But there's still a part of me that's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to say this because it sounds so corny, but it is what it is. You will learn a lot. There's a lot in the hidden curriculum, y'all. If you watch the ABC Disney show Once Upon a Time, they put a lot in there, like a lot. I learned a lot through watching that show. Now, here's what's weird. That show is old. Okay, it came out like, I don't even know how long ago. I remember watching it like earlier, and I would just kind of watch it and be like, oh, this show's kind of corny, but I like it. But it's corny, but I like it, you know? And it would be like my guilty pleasure, but I wouldn't watch it like too much because then I'd be like, okay, it's too corny, whatever. But there's certain shows that if you find yourself always wanting to watch it, it's because but you don't really know why. It's like, it's just comforting for you for some reason. Interrogate that, because it could be that your subconscious mind is tapping into a hidden curriculum that show is giving you. They do that in shows. They will literally, they'll put a whole, like, these folks are initiated, yo. They'll put a whole curriculum in a movie or a show. And sometimes the stupider the show seems, or the sillier the show seems, the more like stuff they'll throw in. I know it gets weird. So for the stars, for folks who have identified as star seeds or indigo, Once Upon a Time is a show that you can watch to navigate your journey, especially if you're moving through this energy of being the chosen one sacrifice. And then you're interested in this concept of reverse polarizing. They literally show it, and they show steps, even going to neutral, all that stuff. They put it in that show. They put a lot in that show. They put in destiny swapping in that show. They put in the idea of like the villains sick of being villains and they want a new script, and they do so much. They put so much in there. So much in there. So I stopped watching that show for like many years, and then something just kind of made me start like watching it again. And it was like really right before I went on my hero's journey, and I just kind of saw it in a different way. Um, yeah, like I started off watching that show identifying more with Emma, who's the lead character, who's that chosen one character who grows up. If you look at her archetype, she is definitely an Indigo 3 archetype for sure. The idea of somebody who just like, she was a foster kid, she was abandoned, she lived a life of crime in the beginning, like, just she had a tough lot in life, as they would say. So she just had to learn things the hard way. Okay, that was her sort of MO. But secretly, but in another script, in another world, she was royalty. In another world, in a parallel realm, and that's what will happen a lot of times with scripting in the simulation, is there'll be parallel things that are happening with you. Okay. We're not going to get into the parallel stuff. That's a whole other frequency. But and then it's like about you remembering that aspect of yourself and then bringing it into your parallel timeline, like merging the opposites, so that you're not like living a fragmented life, but you're bringing them together. So that's a part of the curriculum. And that's one thing that was shared with me as I was like watching that show, is like, okay, if you look at the folks in Storybrooke, so for folks who haven't seen the show Once Upon a Time, it's basically a whole bunch of Disney characters. It's a live action show of like all the Disney characters you can think of. And it makes them as like regular adults too, who are under a curse, who completely forgot who they were. So they were put under a curse by a like a master. I mean, one thing that's interesting is Regina, who's the Wicked Witch who casts the first curse. She was called Madam Mayor. She had that M sort of energy, like Master Magician. Whenever you see M, you can think of like Master Magus, Master Magician, these kinds of things. Okay, so they're kind of showing you too, even in the initials of what she was referred to as. And even Regina, her name Regina means queen. So in this particular show, all of these storybook characters forget who they are because they're cursed. So they don't even know about, if they were heroic or not, or what they were doing, because their cursed life always kind of has them in trauma scripts, But the idea is to get out of Storybrooke. Like the way it was described to me, y'all, is that Storybrooke is one vibrational bandwidth. That's your binary code. Okay, so right now I'm referencing ABC's Once Upon a Time as a way to describe transitioning quote unquote density locks or frequency bandwidths. You can look at let's just say density locks, transcending density locks. So let's just say that the density locks represent the curse, whoever casts the curse. Okay. That's their dream, basically. It's the web that they wove. It's the curse that they cast. If you weave a web, it's done through words a lot of times, weaving. Okay, so somebody cast a curse. Even casting, you also cast a web as well. So someone casts a curse, they put a web over, that's the town of Storybrooke. Anybody who's in that town, they are now in a density lock, right? They can't get out of the curse. They don't even know they're cursed. So you're in a density lock with that. So the idea, if you can imagine, and I know there are folks who vibe with me talking about Once Upon a Time because you're in that starseed kind of energy, because they create shows, y'all, for certain consciousnesses to catch on to. That's what they do. And one of those shows is Once Upon a Time. That's like the Starseed program. That's the Indigo Starseed program. You can find that energy in Once Upon a Time. So they'll give you a lot of keys and codes for initiation, but I mean, they won't tell you everything, obviously, and they're going to distort things in different ways. So I'm not saying follow it to a T, of course not, but they'll show you stuff. They'll tell you things, and they'll put it in this fictional show. But the way it was described to me is like, if you're in a frequency bandwidth that's like the people in Storybrooke, and they forgot who they are, and it's a little gray in Storybrooke as well. Also, where it was filmed, it was filmed, I believe, in British Columbia, but it's like in the Redwoods. So it's like way, way up north, past the Pacific Northwest, but it looks like the Pacific Northwest. So it even looks like Washington. When you get into those areas, it gets really mystical and dreamy as well. Lots of thresholds, lots of other worlds, lots of elven frequencies. Okay. And here's a tip. Here's something I also learned. When you start getting into where technology happens, tech hubs, lots of trees. Lots of trees. What's up with that? Like, if you look at where the most, like, the tech hubs thrive the most, forests, other worlds, y'all, okay? But not everybody's supposed to know about it like that. That's why when you hear about the myths related to the Fae and the elves, what does it say? Oh, they don't like people. What they're really saying is they don't like binary coders. That's the real thing, because, you get into other algorithms and all of a sudden you're not quite, like the average human. What are you? An ascended master? What are, lots of different things. So the code is, it's like the elves or the Fae. They don't want to talk to people really like in your algorithm. There's always going to be exceptions, because just because you're incarnated into a certain algorithm doesn't mean you're not magical, doesn't mean you're not able to influence your world and reality. It's just, you'll need to fight harder for it sometimes. Okay. And I have different ideas around why that is. I'm reserving judgment. Okay. I'm working on being neutral about it. Because it's like, okay, imagine that, let's say that Earth actually is a school. Okay. Let's say that you are an old soul, as they say. Let's say you've been incarnating for a really, really long time. If you were to bring the Earth is a school narrative into that, well, then you would be like, I don't know, doing a postdoctoral research program or paper or something, a study. Maybe it would take a while. Okay, maybe it would be a little bit more rigorous. Okay, if you were looking at it from that narrative, then you being somebody who is a quote unquote more advanced soul, then yeah, maybe you would be put in like, okay, well, let's see. Can they awaken to their creativity in a binary code program? Can they, become that connected, that connected to the wholeness of all that is? That's one way to look at it. You could also look at it as I'm being punished, or there's an oppressor out there that wants to colonize human consciousness for all time. That's another way to look at it. You could also look at it as, oh, this is a simulated game. Maybe like Maybe there's a particular consciousness that organizes everything, okay? And it's not even a human consciousness. And it organizes people or beings and algorithms based upon, their advancement in consciousness. And maybe you're in a game scenario, maybe you're in a simulated game scenario, and you're you're at a really high level. You know what I mean? Like, so there are different ways you could look at it. So I'm working on just like not really having an opinion about it, just like thinking about, well, what are the possibilities? So, because, I've been down the road of, oh, it's a forced reincarnation soul harvesting program, da 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 da. And that's too suppressed in consciousness. So I'm exploring other possibilities as well, and just, focusing on neutrality. And doing that helps me to navigate things with a lot more ease and flow and fun, because I'm not like freaking out or worrying about things, or stressing myself out with. It's about storytelling. What story am I telling myself? What web am I weaving? This is one way, like this is a huge spiritual hygiene practice. What story am I telling myself about what's going on? And this is why, like, we're going to get into this in a bit, how you world build through scripting. I'm going to walk y'all through it with focus questions and all of that kind of stuff to get y'all started. Okay. Yeah, I mean, and there are resources out there too. The biggest thing though is just the fear. Some people hear creativity, or they imagine themselves creating something, and immediately there's fear and all of that, and that's the program that you're navigating. That's how powerful your creativity is. Some of the most impactful things that I learned in meditation, I had to go through an extreme warfare scenario to even get on the other side of it, to like learn what it is, like the beauty of what that is, or the gift of what that is. But, what helped me was like, what story was I telling myself about what I was encountering, and remaining neutral. And it also helped me with this concept that they talk about in some of the ascension texts, which they refer to as compassionate witnessing. This ability to observe something that's happening without judging it. Now, but when you're focused too much on ascension, it's hard to hold that space of compassion, because you're always going to be looking at the other force as being fallen, which in a way is like, the way the simulation has it set up is like a little less than, okay? And if you look at beings as being fallen too much, then it's a way to excuse the sacrificial algorithm, or the binary coded algorithm that's in some of these like checkerboard systems. So the way that the best way to be compassionate is to stay neutral. So that wouldn't mean you're obsessed with ascending. Okay, you also wouldn't be obsessed with descending. You would work on being neutral. So one thing I do is like, I'll work on higher self and lower self, balancing that out within the day. And I put that in quotation marks. Like, I just recently wrote a book on navigating the angelic hierarchies. Shouts out to the folks who have purchased that. It's on PayHip right now. There should be a link below if y'all want to check it out. This book, it's an ebook, and it also has a quantum hypnosis meditation. So you can visit these hierarchies yourself. In the book, I describe my experiences, what I navigated, as well as, so I shared my story, but I also just, shared some of the, the basic concepts related to each of the angelic hierarchies as well. And then, I leave space for you to navigate these as well. But oddly enough, as I started learning more about the angelic hierarchies, I started learning about how they work a lot of times with demonic sort of energies. Okay, it's a both and. You have, in the tree of life architecture, you have the 72 angels of light, or angles of light, and then you have the 72 fallen angels, or fallen angles.
Um, the idea though is like wholeness. So you would want to unify all of those things. You wouldn't want to prioritize one over the other. So have you ever thought of like, okay, what would it look like to connect with your angelic self and then on the same day connect with your demonic self? And it naturally happens in the algorithm when you do this. Like it's this is a lot of what the story of Solomon, King Solomon, and his keys and him being able to create the temple of Israel through the help of angels as well as binding demons and jinn. Okay, this was his ability to bring it all into unity, to bring it all into oneness. And I will say your goetic self, the more quote unquote daemon or even the genius spirit, which is supposed to be more of a fallen aspect, that's where you're going to get your creativity. That's it. That's where a lot of the artistry is going to come from. It's going to come from that because, sorcery is a form of, it's really art, y'all. That's really what it is. So, like at its core, that's what sorcery is. Some sorcery is more standardized than others. So, while you're building up your creative muscles, a good show to watch is Once Upon a Time. One thing that's good to do is like you can actually have a lot of experiences and work through a lot of archetypes and heal through watching movies and shows to a certain extent, you know, um, especially when you're still navigating the binary code algorithm. But I would suggest like pushing yourself to create something while you watch whatever you're watching, like in response. So it's like you're watching it, you're connecting with these archetypes when you're watching the show, but you're also creating something as you're watching it. So it could be like it could start off with you creating something through like an adult coloring book. You might be like, yeah, but I'm not creative. Okay, fine. Can you color with an adult coloring book while you're watching the thing, and then like maybe utilize the colors that show is inspiring out of you? And then, so it's like low pressure. I think a lot of times when we talk about creativity and stuff, immediately a lot of like perfectionism comes up and anxiety can come up. For some people, no. Some people, they're already like doing all this. Um, but it just depends on like what stage you're in with things. So, just start with where you're at. If you knit, you could knit while you watch something. Things that don't make you super nervous, okay? Um, or like maybe you're creating something. If you're a content creator, or if you're a coach or a healer, maybe as you're watching a show, maybe you're creating some kind of a toolkit or something, like I know that's using a lot of screens, but I'm a technomancer, y'all. Like I am not in the vibes of which I used to. I used to be in these vibes of like everything needs to be organic and natural and da 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 da. Because like when I started to see the simulated nature of things, it kind of like shifted things for me. So, I feel like sometimes folks who get in those like organic sort of algorithms, which are very gate kept, by the way, too. Those beings, a lot of times that are like everything's organic, everything's farm raised, da 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 da. Like, the folks that spend time looking down on people for like, I guess, what do they call fast fashion or lots of consumerism and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's a certain algorithm that you need to be in to like be super organic with everything. If people had the option or had more space to cross over into those algorithms, they would. But that's kind of also a part of the scapegoat program. As you can see, it's like it's not enough to just be living an organic lifestyle. It's like there's a part of the algorithm that's like you're going to live that organic lifestyle and then you're going to feel better than everyone else because you live it. It's like these weird subtle ways that hierarchy is perpetuated even in things that look like they're anti-hierarchy. So, when you start studying the simulation more from like a game developer sort of energy, which sounds really weird. Um, yeah, and I didn't come to this realization just overnight. I had these realizations, but then I would always talk myself out of them and then gaslight myself and be like, oh, maybe I'm just taking it too far or this and that. So, a lot of stuff took me a while to accept. But yeah, there are certain, algorithms in terms of neighborhood that certain neighborhoods are on and all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of the nature of like how systems are set up, but more from like an algorithmic standpoint. I think we're going to hear more about that in the times to come. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It even goes into like certain beings feeling afraid to walk in certain neighborhoods. A lot of that has to do with like it's not even about race. Sometimes it's just about like I'm out of my jurisdiction, I'm not in my algorithm, like I don't feel comfortable here. But we sometimes have only contextualized things in the form of like what we can see physically. So race is a good sort of energy for that. It's like, oh well, I don't look like other people in this neighborhood. That's why I feel unsafe. But it could be because you're out of your jurisdiction, you're out of your algorithm, and people can sense that. So, all that to say, they even have like plots in Once Upon a Time where they explore this, where you have the curse, the storybook curse, okay? And then you have people who try to leave and go into another density bandwidth. So there's the way that the storybook curse works is that if you leave, peep this, they're telling you, if you leave Storybrooke, if you leave the curse, or if you try to leave the curse, something bad happens to you. Does that not happen sometimes, like when you are like working on evolving, expanding your consciousness, if you've been in that like spiritual warfare scenario, right? Like it's because you're getting signs from your program that you're in, like, hey, you are out of your jurisdiction. What are you doing? So they're showing that in that show. Okay, it's like, all right, you're in this curse, you're in this density lock. And that's what these ascension texts will talk about. They'll talk about density locks. Why do y'all have density locks? Why are y'all so obsessed with density locks? Oh, well, because otherwise it's too much power and then, humans don't know what to do with it. So what you're saying that certain people need to earn consciousness? Not everybody has those density locks, yo. Not everyone has them. So why is it that some people, like, they'll, if you read their information closely, they'll tell you, you know, they'll tell you that they're gatekeeping, but you gotta read between the lines sometimes. But anyways, they have these things called star crystal seals. These always piss me off, where it's like, okay, you have your chakra systems, you have your basic 7 chakras, but then there's supposedly up to 15 chakras, which really that's even that is very limited, and you can create your own stuff. Anyways, we'll get into that a little later. Um, we want to get out of the templates that they give us in spirituality. So I mentioned that earlier in this live, that if you follow spirituality too much, it'll always get you following a template. But we need to get more in the habit, which is why technomancy is helpful. Get more in the habit of merging your creativity with your spiritual path. So if you're going to listen to a spiritual teacher, create in response. Okay? Have that influence your creativity, but you don't just cap it at, okay, they said this, so that's what this is. Okay? We're going to have to train ourselves out of that as we expand in consciousness. So okay, going back to the whole Once Upon a Time thing.
Okay, I want to move on to the technomancy of hyperdimensional warfare and give y'all some strategies related to world building. But they play around with this concept of what happens when people leave their jurisdiction or leave their density or try to leave their density, that bad things happen. So they talk about these quote unquote fictional places in the worlds beyond the ice wall, right? How there are these different worlds or these different realms beyond the ice wall. What if those are just like different algorithms, y'all? Or different experiences, the ways you can experience reality and consciousness. And ice wall, that kind of shows up in our, if we really start looking at those words and dissecting those words, we can see how they show up in current events. They're telling us, y'all, these are density bandwidths, these are density locks. So we would need to go through the process of waking ourselves up, which is hard because if you're in a cursed sort of energy, you would, and it happens in weird ways. They explore it more in that particular show. Um, but you would need to go through this process of remembering. And, it starts slowly happening to the residents in Storybrooke. They start having flashbacks. Um, and then they start fighting to remember more. Okay. But there is that energy of like, you just need to wake up. Okay. And, but your rational mind's going to be there to interrupt that. And that's kind of how social structures have been like working too, is to like make sure that everybody stays in their lane. Okay. So it's also like a social engineering program. All right. So let's get into it. So, this is on the liminal space and the art of technomancy. So it says hyperdimensional warfare does not begin with armies or institutions. It begins with narrative, with the stories you are permitted to tell about yourself, the images you are allowed to hold, and the identities you are encouraged to inherit. When a system wants to capture a mind, it does not take the body first. It attacks the imagination and installs scripts. So that's why you're having creative blocks. There's a script going on that's telling you, like, no, it's dangerous for you to create your own reality. What are you talking about? It assigns roles. It collapses possibility into a narrow corridor of acceptable outcomes and calls that corridor reality. It's like Storybrooke. For those who have watched Once Upon a Time, Snow White became Mary Margaret. She became a timid elementary school teacher. But when she was Snow White, she was like an Artemis. She was in the jungle. She was in her goddess, okay? She was, with the bow and the arrow. She was a princess. She was royalty. She had all this stuff going for her. But she didn't know that. When she was Mary Margaret, she had no idea. She was in scripts. She was in scripts to keep her in a density bandwidth, okay? Now, how do we transcend this? Okay, this is why art is one of the most subversive forms of self-defense in the simulation, because art reopens what hyperdimensional warfare tries to collapse. Art is redemption because it restores the one thing warfare depends on you forgetting: your ability to imagine beyond the script you were handed. Y'all, the amount of fear-based scripts I had to go through, the stuff I saw, like the sort of energies, yeah, it's scary. But I'm glad I went through it because it helped me to get neutral. The more, and also the more you can meet something at its frequency, the more you can neutralize it. Okay. And then it's not even a threat to you. And then the fear goes away as well. But yeah, there's a lot of fear scripts out there that says stay in your lane, stay in your place. Okay. But it was through creativity a lot of times. And my desire to like be a creative being. That's really what I think, transcending certain density bandwidths is about. It's about living creatively, not having everything prescribed to you already.
Okay, but sometimes you could be in an algorithm where that's like the worst thing in the world. That's like not what you're supposed to be doing. And then you'll feel like you're in a hell state. And then that's the weird part, because like Storybrooke kind of looks like a little hellish if you look at it. There's like always a little gray there. They have the woods and stuff, but everybody dresses like really, there's no color going on. It's like, yeah, the sun's not really out there. So it's kind of blah. All right. Not really a lot of art going on out there either. There's no magic. It's also not, art is a code word too for magic, for sorcery. Okay, so art is redemption because it restores the one thing warfare depends on you forgetting: your ability to imagine beyond the script you were handed. The simulation does not need chains or cages to contain you. It only needs to shrink your imagination of what you believe is possible. And the shrinking of that imagination is what causes those cages. The ether itself, though, is a trap. Once you transcend certain frequency bandwidths, you transcend ether. Okay. But there's a certain density that you need to hold to transcend ether. This is when you're getting into the plasma body. But what they don't want to tell people is they have that plasma body under lock and key. Yes, they do. It's not about how good you are or how much you want it sometimes. Sometimes you'll need to think a little bit more like a gatekeeper or a smith. Okay. So yeah, to keep these, to keep something elite, you need to have the in crowd and you need to have the out crowd. Okay. Because, that's really why the curse was started in the first place for Storybrooke. Going back to Once Upon a Time. Was it not because Regina, the evil queen, she needed her revenge and she wanted things to go a very particular way? She was always very artistic and she never lost it either. She was probably, that's okay, another thing you want to peep with Storybrooke and Once Upon a Time. Everybody else kind of looked like a little faded out and stuff, but Regina, the evil queen, the one who cast that curse, she had the biggest house. She had the most style. She was the most put together. She was baking her apple pies. She still had her magic on the side as well because she was awake. If you really look at it, like if you look at like all the different characters, she's the one who was the most vibrant in her curse that she cast. That's the power. That's the aesthetic of authority. So, yeah, but going back to the density locks, you being able to hold the frequency, like if we were to put this in Once Upon a Time terms, it's you going from being a member of Storybrooke to going back to the Enchanted Forest. I know, just look, as corny as this sounds, you actually, me explaining it in this Disney show will actually drive it home more, because especially for folks who have watched the show or who are interested in watching it, you can go back to what I'm talking about and you can look at the archive of certain archetypes through that. Like, it's just more context. It's a more richer template that I can create. If I can refer you back to a piece of art and something that's really in the pop culture egregore, which is what Disney has a lot of. It's a very elven frequency over there, by the way. Okay. So, not everybody can hold the elven frequency like that. It's a more elite sort of energy, despite what they said about, the Keebler elves and stuff. They put a narrative of what elves are to, so that basically either folks aren't as interested or they overlook them. But it's something to look at a little closer. the connection that elves have with the creation of your reality. It's just something to think about. So that's why I'm saying in Disney's Once Upon a Time. You know, they didn't talk about reverse polarizing in that show, but they sure did break down those concepts with several characters on that show. This idea of going to neutral. Okay, so Emma, the chosen one, she started off as the light chosen one, and then she had to become the dark one. And they tell you too, and the dark one is the dark one because somebody needs to hold the darkness of the world. So the dark one is the black sheep. Okay. And even the dark one, he goes through a process of extreme heart alchemy, becoming somebody extremely full of hate, and then going to neutral with his heart and beginning all over again, doing a whole alchemical process through love. So they tell you in a lot of ways of what mastery would look like within this game board. You would need to transcend the checkerboard by becoming the black and the white, and also remembering the world beyond black and white. Okay, and that's when you're getting into the elven realm, and it's a realm of story. It's not about fact or fiction, it's story. So you need to be meeting that frequency. And that's, one thing I'm working on now is like, because I've been hearing, sometimes people will send me messages and stuff, or y'all will ask me, you'll be like, okay, there's a lot of stuff here that I resonate with, but sometimes like I have a hard time incorporating it or understanding it fully. So I'm pushing myself now to put some of these concepts in story so that you can experience it through a particular archetype as opposed to it like being theoretical and stuff. So anyways, but like that's a whole new ball game. Fiction, your weaving needs to be on point for that. Like big up to all the folks, like the folks who create worlds and stuff, like from like the folks who create like, I don't know, 15 fictional books, right? They do a fictional book series. They're a wizard, straight up. To build all that world, to build those worlds, like 15 books of them, fictional world, like that is a power move right there, y'all. That's a power move right there. Like it's okay. There are folks who do it. They write fiction because they love to write and they love to tell stories. And there are folks out there who do that to create other worlds and other potentialities. And you can do that through the realm of story. Okay, it's wild. It's a power move. So anyways, what better way to convey this than to reference a very popular show that has basically pumped the collective consciousness with story. Like it was so bad, y'all, that when I was first doing my thalamus, I was doing a thalamus clearing, and I was also working on it was the thalamus and something else. Okay, we'll just talk about the thalamus right now. But I was doing a midbrain activation, which is the creative node. I had to clear out so much Disney stuff that was just there. And this was before Once Upon a Time, like, because some people might be like, well, you talk about Once Upon a Time all the time. So yeah, you have no, this was like stuff from my childhood. The way, like, even because Disney is the one that first introduced a lot of these magical concepts to us. Like stories, Disney did it first. They introduced it first. They set a whole program up related to it. Even how we see spirituality was put through them, or magic, or all kinds of stuff, sorcery. We saw it through Disney a lot of times first. The way we saw relationship, the way we were taught even to dream, what to aspire to, Disney. I had to go through a huge deprogramming just with the Disney program alone. But one thing I've learned, y'all, is that from a neutral standpoint,
You utilize the same tools that indoctrinated you to reverse that indoctrination. That is, it's a very effective. I think this is a deprogramming tool. I haven't researched it, but I want to research it and see if there are any like studies related to this with like deprogramming, or like you go through the energies to that's what I did too when I had to deprogram, like being in a work cult. I had to study the psychology, the dark psychology of how it happened, to like deprogram myself out of it, and to make sense of it, to bring it to neutral. So I don't even think, like, without that experience, I don't even think I would have written the 50 Shades of Marduk. Like, I don't even think I would have taken it that far. But I was so, that's kind of been a way for me to heal with certain things, is to understand the mechanics of how it works. Because, like, the way I see it, it's like, okay, that sucked. I don't want that to happen again. Why did that happen? Okay, let me study that. Let me study the nature of my consciousness that made that a thing. So with Disney, because there was so much indoctrination, they also put in a lot of alchemical secrets as well. They put in some codes too. So like, let's look at those as well. And I do feel like Once Upon a Time was like a way for them to um I'm not going to say make up for some of the ways they presented stories in movies, but to offer another perspective. I feel like the writers of that show had a lot of fun, sharing different alchemical tools, sharing different sorcery sort of thing. I feel like they just had fun doing it, and they just like slipped more in there. Whereas like if you're watching like a movie, a 90-minute movie or something, like, it's going to be a little different. But the way they were able to develop the characters and the realm of story with that, they did a good job. So it's a way to also deprogram some of your Disney narratives too, if you've been really impacted by Disney. And the question is, who hasn't? I want to know who that person is. So yeah, I utilized the energies of Disney's Once Upon a Time to also deprogram some of the narratives I was holding on to, the subconscious narratives that I was holding on to related to Disney as well. Okay, so back to hyperdimensional warfare. This is why hyperdimensional warfare always begins with the same tactic: the limitation of imagination. The system trains you to see yourself through inherited myths. Okay, look, exactly what we were talking about. I know I'm yo-yoing here, but we're weaving, okay? The system trains you to see yourself through inherited myths, cultural stereotypes, family roles, gender templates, and trauma loops. It assigns you a character, a victim, a helper, a caretaker, a sinner, a daughter, a prodigy, a failure, a chosen one, a pawn. And once that role is accepted, the script becomes self-enforcing. Art is the rupture point in that architecture. It destabilizes the imposed narrative by proving that you can create a new one. This is like, when have you spoken back to your environment? Okay, like, how often do you do that? If something happens that you don't like, okay, or if you get presented with something that is not fully in your yes, like, okay, one thing to do, try this. If somebody gives you an option, like, we can do either this or that, that's a binary code program. Okay, they want you to stay in binary code. Try to create a third option. So if they say, hey, should we get Chinese or Mexican? And I know this could sound really annoying, but just try it. Like, how about Indian? How about soul food? Not to be a contrarian, because I know that could be annoying. Like, if you're working in a binary coded workplace and you're like always creating a third option every single day, like, you could be the most hated person at work. But so I get it. I get that sometimes you got to read the room, okay, and just know where you're able to
have autonomy. And also peep when you're not able to have autonomy, because that's showing you what script you're in. If you're in a place or in an environment where you have to be binary, like you have to be either or in order to feel safe, then that lets you know, okay, start setting the intention. And I would work with the energy of the spiders. The spiders are a 24th dimensional energy, y'all. That's where I've really kind of connected with them the most, is like the 24th dimension. But they also, you can also connect with them in dimension 0 and 1 too. Okay. But yeah, so like the frequencies of 0, 1, or 24. 8 is another one. Okay. Yeah, 8 too. That's another one. But for some reason, 24 was like, I've seen that to be a very big spider dimension. So anyway, yes, if you're in a situation where everything has to be either or, you always have to hide who you are. You can't listen. Oh, here's how you know. Are you in an environment where you can never listen to what you are really interested in out loud? That used to be me. You have to always put your headphones in because you don't want anyone to hear what you're listening to. Sometimes even like if I'm like, let's say I'm in the backyard, right? Okay, maybe I'm not going to blast like a particular lecture that I'm listening to in the backyard. I get it. Sometimes it's going to be like that. But if you're constantly in an environment where you have to hide who you are and stuff, then that's letting you know you're in that fallen, what do they call it? That fallen bi wave frequency, which is really, I just call it the sacrifice timeline. You just want to get out of the sacrifice timeline. And the way you do it is not by fighting sacrifice, because you'll experience sacrifice one way or another, but you'll just experience it differently. Okay. So it's not about opposing anything. It's about choosing neutrality. But what would that mean? That would mean you create a whole new trajectory. You're deciding to weave your own path. You are choosing to be an architect of your world. This is a Christic frequency. This is a Christos frequency. Here's what we miss a lot of times. Wasn't Jesus a carpenter? Isn't a carpenter a builder? Jesus was a builder. Okay, so we hear one aspect of what Jesus was, but like foundationally though, he was a builder. Okay. So there is an energy of, even when you get into like a Christian sort of energy, there's a builder, creator sort of frequency related to that. You need to build your world, even if you want to be closer to that, more of that light frequency of Christ, you would be a builder. Okay. Jesus was a carpenter. Okay. So we talked about hyperdimensional warfare, limiting imagination, moving into trauma loops. Let's talk about art as redemption. Okay. Let's talk about art as redemption. So it says, redemptive art is the technology through which you exit the game board without needing to flip it. You transcend the rules by refusing to play from within their architecture. You create from the liminal, where identity is fluid, where mirrors do not hold shape, where language bends, where the simulation's algorithms cannot track your next move. Yeah, because if you're in the binary code and you're choosing this or that, like you're easily predictable. But if you're constantly creating a third option in how you do things, it's going to your environment's going to respond to you. In technomancy, this is known as field override. The moment art becomes a tool of redemption. I'm not going to get into the exact examples, but this works. You can set your intention. And you just think about this. Think about utilizing your environment to create your world. And instead of utilizing fixed places, try utilizing thresholds. If it's a riddle, it's a riddle. That's what I said. I'm not going to explain it. Okay, I'm in the elven frequency. You gotta figure it out. That's another thing. Riddles. It's never gonna be, because it's about creation, y'all. If you're looking for the answers too much, somebody to tell you the answers, you are not in God mode. You're not in elven mode, which is it's like it's a very creator frequency. Okay, so you can't even meet that frequency. You won't be able to have a good experience with the elven frequency if you're not in your creative capacity. You'll be in the tricks. You'll get tricked. That's when the trickster stuff is going to come up. But if you define yourself as a creator and you're not looking for the answers, you're not looking for the right way to do things. So this goes back to the whole Starseed thing. If you've been caught up in the Indigo program, the Starseed program, they're going to tell you how to do things. This is how you ascend. If you're listening to them, you already are led astray, because you're taking away your consciousness, your ability to create, and you're giving that to somebody else. You're giving that to another spiritual leader. Okay, this is why we want to start creating as a form of cosmic consciousness, doing it through creation. So in technomancy, I already talked about field override. So what is redemptive art? It collapses psychological loops, restores the nervous system's authorship, breaks mimic programs, dissolves ancestral scripts, interrupts mental surveillance, fractures imposed identities, writes new neural architecture. So redemptive art, I mentioned this earlier. The first book I wrote, it was redemptive art. I was pissed. I had all this anger. I was getting out of a work cult. There's like all this stuff I was navigating. And I utilized that as my redemptive art. Okay, I also got out of a toxic work environment through it. It's like, I'm going to use all this rage, all this hurt, all this stuff. I'm going to alchemize it through my own creation, and I'm going to create a whole, that's how I started, after being in corporate wellness for some years, and then academia before then. I started doing workplace wellness, because I literally wrote a book on healing through this process known as grind culture, and created a protocol to do it. And it helped me, and it also helped other people. I created a third option. Okay, this is just one way of how it works. Okay, so it's a way of weaving your own web. But it's a form of warfare. It's a form of redemption. Someone dragged your name through the mud. Okay. So then what are you going to do to like balance that out, bring it to neutral? It's also about neutrality. So for people who have experienced stuff like related to being a targeted individual, or related to, the flying monkey effect, narcissistic abuse, the way they get to you is they basically flood you with their narrative of the world. It's like a curse. It's like the evil queen's curse, Regina Mills's curse on the town of Storybrooke. She focused her intention and her narrative on exactly what she wanted other people's lives to be, and how she wanted them to think about themselves. It's a form of sorcery. So she cast that. The ability then would be like, if one of those characters also does something on the side, maybe writes a short story to get out there, to build a world, where they create another option. They didn't show that in the story, though. That would have changed a lot of things. But it's this ability to, if somebody is flooding you with one narrative of yourself and it's out of resonance with who you are, well, then it's your responsibility to create from the place of who you authentically are. But it's a way of bringing the energies to neutral as well. Okay. more of us are doing this naturally with the way social media is going and the way content creation is going, but it's just difficult sometimes when you're in an attention economy and then you're expected to comment on everything or respond to comments, because now what's happening is you're kind of presenting yourself in front of a panel, and artistically, like, that's really difficult. That's really difficult to do, you know. Yeah, if you're looking at artistic creation as being a form of redemption or as being a way of connecting with the cosmos, like the cosmic fabric of things, if you're too caught up in what other people are saying about your creations, like, there's that could lead to an imbalance. It's just something to think about. So, yeah, we're going to also need to be more creative with the way we share our creations online in the future. I don't know what that's going to look like. I'm curious about like what other options could be. So it's like right now I have comments off on most of my stuff, and it keeps me, it keeps, at least it just depends also on what I'm moving through, the energies I'm moving through. But there are times where it's like I just need to be in my own current and in my own flow. And then the other option is, okay, well, put all your comments on and then, open up those portals and hold the space to open up those portals, whatever that looks like. I'm wondering what are some other opportunities? Like what, maybe like that's too binary coded. Maybe there are other ways to engage. So it's something I'm curious about, and I want to keep exploring. But when you're looking at art as redemption, you can't be focused on what people are saying about your art, what they're saying about your creations. And that's really difficult because the way a lot of the simulation has been set up is to get people to do that and to comment on your stuff as a form of warfare. Okay, let's think about it. Back in 2020, right? And the whole pandemic happened, and then like a whole bunch of people got online businesses exploded, all this kind of stuff, right? um there was a moment where a lot of beings who maybe would be considered indigo or considered star seeds, all of a sudden, like, a lot of beings woke up around that time. They started putting out a lot of spiritual content, a lot of healing content. And then what happened? Those same creators, those same spiritualists, they started getting hacked. I don't know if y'all remember. They started getting like the fake accounts. That happened to me a lot on TikTok, especially, um, where like there would just be a lot of people who were claiming to be others, like they were claiming the identity of other creators. And there was that energy of like, well, now that creativity isn't as gate kept, how do we own the energy of creators? Okay, we were seeing that play out in real time with these like fake accounts of certain creators, certain spiritualists. Okay, and this is what started to make things more apparent as it relates to destiny swapping, which is just the sacrifice algorithm that we have going on. So it's a form of warfare. Okay. And so that is, so you choosing not to create, it doesn't mean you have to share it, like, but it's like, it's kind of like you not defending yourself, like I think we kind of need to look at art as a spiritual warfare tool, especially when we're talking about transcending the binary code or transcending that storybook density in that cursed algorithm of once upon a time. Okay, you kind of need to see it as like it's like your biggest defense. Okay, it won't always be like that, but to get out of or to transcend that binary code or that cursed algorithm, it's like you're leaving you're leaving your defenses on the table when you don't create. Okay, when you don't say who you are, because then you're just You're accepting other people deciding who you are, you know? And like how do you stay in your divinity, your godhood, you know? Your creator consciousness that we all have if you are allowing other people to say who you are. Okay, so art operates as redemption, not because it erases the past, but because it rewrites the position from which you relate to the past. The victim becomes the voice, the wound becomes material, the shadow becomes texture, trauma becomes thread. In creating, you stop being the one acted upon and become the one who shapes the meaning of what happened. Redemption is not forgiveness, redemption is authorship. When you write, paint, craft, speak, record, or design, you are not merely producing a creative object. You are reclaiming the inner territory the simulation attempted to colonize. You are recovering the imagination that was domesticated, numbed, shamed, or disciplined out of you. You are reactivating the original intelligence that cannot be programmed, the part of you that dreams beyond the code, the part of you that sees beyond the grid, and the part of you that remembers who you were before being placed in a storyline. I actually think, you know, I'm going through interesting, I'm not going to call it a crown chakra because deeper than that. It's not just a crown chakra, but I'll just say a consciousness retrieval, a mass consciousness retrieval. And something that's helping me with that is story, writing this story. It started off, I was like, first I was like, okay, because I was having those energies of like, I kept putting off this story. I've been developing this concept for this story for a very long time. And I kept putting it off. And I'm like, okay, I got to interrogate why I'm putting this off, you know, because I'm publishing all this other stuff. So why not this story, you know, which is out of my comfort zone. So I had to interrogate that. And it actually supported with activating a deep consciousness retrieval, you know, as I was, you know, because, yeah, there's something about any sort of book that you write or any sort of creation that, you know, when you decide, like, I want to do this thing and you see it to its completion, that's amazing. Okay. Not to say you always have to complete things, but it definitely just shows that you're committed to your craft, you know. And it's a birthing process that you go through. So I wouldn't put down anything, but I will say there's a different frequency that needs to be turned on for you to be in the realm of fiction. Um and there's certain consciousness valves that I'm activating through it, you know. So it's actually helping me with the crown, you know, the skull. And you know, when we think about the crown chakra, we usually think about meditation and all of that stuff. But we also, I mean, that's also where, you know, your midbrain is, which is the seat of your imagination as well. And it's when people do studies on the midbrain, they show that it's a lot more supple and a lot more malleable as a child. And then as you become an adult, it becomes smaller because your creativity basically has shrunken. So a lot of what I needed to do to even get into the realm of creativity in a deeper way is I had to work through my midbrain, or they call it the corpus callosum, and start activating that, and transcending the binary code within that, you know. So this is also help. This is because it's spiritual. Creativity is a spiritual act. It's like the most spiritual act, you know, when you really think about it. You're bringing a concept, something that's non-physical, into the physical. Like that is a magical act. That is an alchemical process. So it's a way for you to expand your consciousness. It's not just something you do even just for fun, even though that's enough. And it also helps you to think in more complex ways And also it helps to reveal certain latent things happening in your subconscious. It's very interesting, very, very interesting. So there's a crown activation too related to artistry. Okay, so let's look at some focus questions for you to consider, or we'll look at one. So it says, what part of your inner world has been silenced, distorted, or contained? And what art could you make that would give that part its original voice back? So I'm going to read that again. It says, what part of your inner world has been silenced, distorted, or contained? Okay. So where is the pain? Go to the pain. There's a reason why, sometimes artists can be a little tragic. Sometimes, or sometimes folks who go through pain have a way of alchemizing it and creating beautiful art with it. It's an alchemical practice. So where's the pain? Go there. And then what art could you make that would give that part its original voice back? Is it a song? Could you put it in a song? Could you put it in a poem? Could you paint a picture? Like, could you create a vision board related to it? There's different ways. It's just about coaching yourself through that experience, because you're gonna have things that come up to you that say, oh no, I have other things to do. But that's just the part that wants to keep you in the program and keep you in the script. Okay, so let's look at myth making as sovereignty, elven intelligence, and the power of world building. So it says hyperdimensional warfare collapses your imagination so it can control your identity. And what is hyperdimensional warfare? Warfare happening on many different dimensions, things that transcend what you can see, taste, touch, and feel. And that's because, okay, when you start waking up to other potentialities, you're going to see, it's going to scare you first. You're going to see more of the negative stuff first. So that's also what's happening with spiritual warfare when you're tapping into that. It's just like you're starting to perceive things. You're a Storybrooke resident waking up to the fact that you've been cursed. Like it starts off small. It's like, wait, hey, what's going on here? And weird stuff starts happening that you can't explain, but you have this really funny feeling that things are not the way they're supposed to be. That's really what hyperdimensional warfare is. Okay. So it says hyperdimensional warfare collapses your imagination so it can control your identity. But mythology does the opposite. Mythology re-expands consciousness. It gives you a landscape larger than the story you were assigned. To create myth is to reclaim the fundamental architecture of meaning itself. So this is this is the main reason why I'm pushing myself, or not pushing, it's not pushing anymore. But I did push myself to like make headway on this fictional project. The reason why is because I was studying a lot of archetypes. I had to go in a lot to Greek myth. I had to go in a lot to Roman myth. I went into all different spiritual texts, all things that have been created by other people. And I had to do that too, because a lot of like what you'll find in the simulation is scripted through Roman stuff, Greek stuff, the Bible, like Egyptian stuff. Like they have all these scripts. It's like Hollywood, okay? It's like that, y'all. So you're moving through all of the imagination and the worlds that other people created, which is great. And at the same time, if you're looking to advance your consciousness, you will need to create your own thing. And yeah, you can do that through nonfiction and the realms of nonfiction. And I've done a lot of that. Okay. And yeah, you could do it through different ways. I've done a lot of nonfiction writing. I've done a lot of subliminals and, worked through sound design and all that. But the realm of story, world building a story, that's a little different, and at least for me, it just meant I needed to turn on different acts, parts of my consciousness, but I had to push myself because I was like, I'm immersing myself too much in other people's mythology, which is important to do it to an extent, because then you can peep what script you're in. Because yeah, it literally is like that, y'all, like scripts. You know what a good example of this is? Another Disney show. This was a spin-off from that Marvel Universe show. What was the one with Scarlett? Was not Scarlett Johansson, the Olsen twin. Not the Olsen twin. The Olsen twins' sister, younger sister, WandaVision. That show WandaVision. They had a spin-off called Agatha After All with the villain Agatha. She had her own spin-off show. And they describe this whole concept of being in a script really well, because the way the show starts in Agatha After All is she completely forgets she's a witch, because in WandaVision, she's like this evil witch. But something happens where she gets caught up in somebody's like curse or program, and she thinks she's this like detective who's solving this murder case. Okay, and she gets really caught up in the script of being a detective, and beings from another, basically her other life had to come in and be like, hey, like, remember who you are. Like, they had to like kind of wake her up. But the way that they describe that, like the way she goes through the motions in that first episode, I thought that was really cool. So it says, mythology re-expands consciousness. So making sure you're creating your own mythology. So we're going to get into that in a bit, how you create your own mythology. To create myth is to reclaim the fundamental architecture of meaning itself. It is the moment you stop asking what is real and begin asking, what world does my power thrive in? Myth is not a lie. Myth is the third layer between fact and fiction, the liminal corridor where possibility becomes form. This corridor is where all magic lives. This is where you can build a world that the simulation cannot govern. Y'all, try creating your own mythology. Create your elven world. I go into more depth in this book, The Technomancy of Hyperdimensional Warfare. But what you can do is try changing the way you journal to creating your own mythology or creating your building thing. You could literally just create a document, an ongoing document, or an ongoing notes page, a world building notes page. And start, if you're encountering a problem, then write yourself as having the problem solved, but in the third person. Okay? Take yourself out of, don't say I, put yourself in the third person and remove yourself from the situation and script your narrative. If you want to make it even stronger, then develop a matching visual to connect with this as well. And a very interesting magical thing will start happening over time. You don't want to dwell on it. Forget you ever wrote it. Move on with your life. But from time to time, check your world building doc. Start reading things. Very interesting things will start happening. You'll start being like, oh, that literally just happened. It's a mythology on page, but that actually did happen. That's happened a lot of times because you're creating other potentialities. You're creating other webs, and then they can connect, and the more skilled you become at weaving and stuff like that, then you can, this is how you build your world. So instead of journaling and putting yourself in the journal, I, try removing yourself, putting yourself in third person, and write as if it already happened. And then add another piece of art, like a visual piece of art as well, to solidify it. Okay, that is how you can start creating your own mythology. In the book, Technomancy of Hyperdimensional Warfare, I give a lot of different tools. There's like a lot of different, like just different practices and stuff like that that you could look into as it relates to this. So I won't get into it all here. But that's to get y'all started, okay? Or not started, but wherever you're at, it's to add to your toolkit. And that is where we're going to close it out, is just like, if you are interested in another potentiality, you will need to build it. You will need to be a builder. Being a world builder is not really about being an emperor king crown. That's one way of looking at it, but that's the storefront. It's really being an author. Start being an author of your world. They even show this in Once Upon a Time. All of these powerful characters, but who are they looking for when they need to change their script? They go to the author. Okay. But they externalize the author in Once Upon a Time. None of the characters ever wrote their own thing, really. That would have been, actually, that was forbidden. They forbade it in Once Upon a Time to do that. And you can see why. Okay. But this is where you also need to utilize discernment. And it's like, don't take everything they say word for word, but peep the codes that they're giving, and then make your own meaning and weave your own web with it. So yeah, that's where we're going to stop, y'all. I do have a workshop called Mysteries of the Black Sun, which is tomorrow. It's on Black Diamond. I believe it's at 2 p.m. I forgot the exact time. I have to, I'll put it on the message board. But yeah, we're going to get into more of this concept of merging the black and the white, and merging the opposites to cultivate this rainbow bridge frequency. But everybody wants the rainbow. Everybody wants all the bright and shiny colors, but did you master the black and the white? That's the frequency of, that's a big part of holding a larger frequency bandwidth, is can you hold the black and the white? And art as a redemptive practice can help you to do that, and to not take things as seriously, and to also, you can retrieve your power in your day-to-day existence that way. All right, y'all. Sending lots of love to y'all. Chat with